it simple. First of all, God has always had a need to reach out to people. Ever since the beginning of time, God has been working at trying to reach people and to tell them that I love you. And God has always had a mission for people, and God's mission existed long before the church. God's mission will exist long after we're gone. Halfway through this time, God understood a need to send Jesus into the world. And so Jesus came into the world and became a source of healing and freedom for us all. Jesus came into the world God was in Christ, reconciling the world to himself. And in the end of that, God gave the church the mission of reconciliation as well. And so the church, in its immediate form, began to reach out to Christ's mission. If you think back on the book of Acts, you'll see that Jesus was reaching out to people in a lot of different ways, and in the book of Acts, that the early church was first started to reach out to people. And so people gathered at meal times, people took care of people in their community, they did all kinds of stuff to make a difference in the world in which they were a part of. They were becoming the hands and feet of Jesus, and they reached out in that way. And they expressed that reaching out through reaching out to people. And the church began to also try to find a way that they could help people begin to relate to God. And so as the church began to grow and develop, it was always focused around reaching into God's mission and being a part of God's mission. Well, as time went on, the church became more institutional, and it began to think a little differently about what it was trying to do. And instead of the church reaching out to people, the church began to think, how can we get more people to come to our church? In addition, the church also, in its own arrogance in some ways, began to say, how can we get God to come to our church as well? And if you don't believe that's true, just look at the last invocation that we might have prayed together. You know, we're asking God to come into this place, to be present, to touch our hearts and our minds, when God has always been there. So what we're talking about is the leadership task of about turning this around again. How do we get the church to reach out to the people in our communities? How do we get a church to say, instead of our church has a mission, God's mission has a church? So when leaders of a congregation have this kind of model about success, about the institutional side of this triangle, they begin to ask the wrong kinds of questions, and they begin to focus on the wrong kinds of things. The first question they begin to ask is, how do we get more people to come to our church? And they think that that would measure success of a congregation, when you can have a church full of people who are not doing anything to be the hands and feet of Jesus. They start to ask the question, what can we do to get more money for our ministry, to run our church? And then the focus turns on chasing the almighty dollar rather than chasing what it is God has called us to be. We also focus then on how can we make our building prettier, or how can we add another rank to the organ? How can we do a lot of work around this place so our building looks attractive to people? Those are not the things that Jesus died for on the cross. And especially when we get to the sin of thinking about how can we make our congregation more prestigious for the rest of the community. Those are all issues of institutional stability that we seek after as leadership. And that keeps the church from fulfilling the mission that God has called us to be. Well, if we're going to be the hands and feet of Jesus, the scorecard for success looks different. The scorecard for a successful church then becomes not how many people came, but how many lives are transformed as a result of being a part of this faith community. We would look at it to say, how is our community different as a result of this church being in our community? It's a sad commentary when we ask people a lot of times, what would the community miss if your church was to close tomorrow? And people can't answer that question. And better yet, people are equipped for mission. That's how we measure success of a missional church. How many people are being the hands and feet of Jesus? How many people are making a difference in the world with what they've got to work with?